On the streets of Kabul, the Taliban has set up makeshift security checkpoints, halting traffic and checking cars. It's a remarkable change in atmosphere and life for the people of Afghanistan. The sudden change in leadership casts a cloud over the future of the country and its residents in uncertainty. Live now to our Asia correspondent, Adrian Brown. Adrian, like you, I went to Afghanistan about 8 years ago. I don't know whether you heard my conversation then with an Afghan who worked as a casual interpreter, as a contractor all those years ago. He is in this heartbreaking situation now where he has left his family, he's in hiding, and the Taliban are essentially hunting him down. They're making phone calls, trying to find out where he is, and he's made this heartbreaking plea to the Australian government saying the Taliban sees me like he sees Western forces, i.e. the Australian ADF, the enemy. Do you have any confidence that the Taliban has changed?
Look, it's hard to say. I think the Taliban at the moment is trying to project this sort of benevolent image. But of course, we know from the past that the Taliban lie, the Taliban deceive. Have they really changed? It's hard to tell. I think perhaps the people they have in the capital at the moment are the best of a pretty bad bunch. As to the fighters they still have in places like Kandahar, Herat, and other major cities in the country, they may not be of the same standard, the same level of professionalism as the ones that you're looking at now. Have they changed? I don't think so. I think the Taliban have only ever had one goal, and that was to, regain control of the country. Now, when I was there 20 years ago, when the Taliban were toppled and the Northern Alliance poured into Kabul, it was hard to imagine that the Taliban then could make any sort of comeback. But of course, we were wrong. What happened was that the Taliban simply regrouped, dusted themselves off, went back to their villages, and went back to the mountains and regrouped. When we talk about the Taliban, Laura, the Taliban is not one sort of amorphous group. It is a series of individual franchise holders, groups. And sometimes these groups were enemies of the Taliban. The tribal mosaic in Afghanistan is very, very complex, but essentially, alliances and allegiances shift all the time. People who are fighting with the Taliban today may well become their enemies in a few months or a few years' time. That's why it is so unpredictable. But in the short term, the security vacuum in Kabul, which has left that aid worker in the highly, highly dangerous situation he's now in, and of course, multiply that 500,000 times or even more, is a reminder that the early months of Taliban rule are going to be chaotic and potentially very bloody. Watching from the sidelines, of course, are Afghanistan's anxious neighbors, including China, which we spoke about last week. For China, this is, I think, the worst of all outcomes. It wanted some sort of negotiated settlement, a sort of coalition government, perhaps of some sort. But what it has now is Taliban control imposed on Afghanistan. And, China worries that Afghanistan could become a base for armed groups to carry out attacks in the western region of China, Xinjiang, which, of course, is home to the ethnic Muslim Uyghur minority. So China certainly has very real concerns about what Taliban rule could mean. But we have to remember one thing, Laura, what the Taliban wants more than anything else is recognition. It wants legitimacy. And, the question is, what is the Taliban prepared to give in return for that legitimacy? We know that probably China is going to recognize the Taliban. We know that Russia is probably going to recognize the Taliban. Both countries have kept their diplomats in Kabul, and probably Pakistan will as well. Iran has also kept its embassy in Kabul. That's another country that might recognize the Taliban. And, the Taliban would be very happy if those major countries were to recognize it, because, of course, the United States, Australia, Britain, for the time being at least, certainly will not.
No, they certainly will not. We will see whether that changes in the not too distant future. Adrian, always good to talk to you. I have to leave it there. Thanks so much.